So of course, Primitivo is what I call the Italian clone of Zinfandel, and you know, we have another block of the standard clone of Zinfandel here, and when they were young, they're now about 10 years old, they look virtually identical, but now as they're getting older, I'm starting to notice some differences. The Primitivo clusters are a little bit smaller, the berries are a little smaller, and they're a looser cluster compared to a standard Zinfandel. Brightness in reds, along with, you know, the sugar, the flavors, the acid balance, is the color development. And whether you chew on berries out in the vineyard and spit it out and see the intensity of the color, or you bring the samples back into the winery and process them and then look at the settled juice, that visual key is very important for assessing maturity. Obviously your dark varieties like Cabernet and Petite Sirah and Syrah all develop that color pretty early on, but some of your lighter varieties like Sangiovese, Cabernet Franc, and even Lemberger, it's later in the ripening process that you get that color development. So when I'm walking through tasting the berries in the vineyard, it's I'm not just tasting for flavors, but I'm looking at color development too. It's a pretty accurate indicator of maturity.
Tell me a little bit about Lemberger.
Well, originally brought into Washington by Walt Clore in the I think even all the way back to the 60s, but he brought it in from British Columbia nursery up there, and they had imported it from Germany, and hence the German name for this variety, Lemberger. And actually it's better known or more widely planted in Austria and Hungary. It's a major red variety for each of those two countries, and in Austria it's called Blaufränkisch, and Hungary Keck Francos. So if you travel to those countries and if you drink a red wine that's not called Pinot Noir, most likely it's Lemberger or their names. But it's Walt Clore was a big fan of Lemberger, really liked the variety. It tends to make a soft, very fruity, moderate color intensity red wine, and it's attractive for those reasons for an early release red that's just a pleasant drinking red, or a base for a blend. It's early to mid-season ripener. The one thing that is somewhat problematic for the variety is that all the commercial blocks planted here have leaf roll in it. And you'll be able to see it in this block here. You'll notice the leaves starting to turn a reddish color, and that's a symptom of leaf roll virus. There is some virus-free Lemberger plant material in the WSU's Foundation Vineyard now, so it'd be real interesting to get some of that out and into commercial plantings and see how that variety performs without the virus in it. One of the things that's kind of fun about it is that due to the virus, it has a fairly high acid at maturity. So it's one that you never have to do any acid additions to. Plus, as a finished wine after malolactic, it has a fairly low pH, and it gives the wine a surprisingly long ageability because of that lower pH and higher acid. I have some Lemberger that I made back in the early 90s. It's just as fresh as can be. The color's perfect on it, and it's just a great wine. You notice the soil here is very sandy, and that's typical. The closer you are to any of the to the Columbia River, it's very, very sandy, and then as you move away, going say to the north, the south Columbia, it gets into a finer silt loam type soil.
And what's the reason behind that?
Greater levels of wind next to the river, and so it's your coarser sand or grains or soil particles that get left behind, and the silt gets moved further away.
So what is it with you and some of these, I think people would call them oddball varieties, you know, Petite Sirah and Primitivo and Lemberger and things that people generally don't explore, but you seem to thrive on.
Well,
Zinfandel even.
It's probably like with a lot of winemakers, it has part to do with our own preferences and wine consumption and the varieties we like to gravitate to as a consumer, but also to some degree in terms of developing a market niche, whether it's unusual varieties or different blends or working with dessert wines, fortified wines. I find it both fun, I find it enjoyable as a consumer, and I also look at it as offering something different to the consumer. That can present challenges when you're out trying to sell wine and the consumer's looking for Cabernet or Chardonnay, but at the same token, it gives them something different to look at when they come into our winery.
Well, it would seem that in the last, say, 5 years, people have gravitated away from, Merlot and Chardonnay and Cab and are looking for different expressions of wine.
I think if you look at the sales volume in those varieties, there's still a lot of people that consume it, but it's definitely true. There are people that are out there looking for something different. The growers are looking for alternative varieties to plant, and I think they're finding advocates in the smaller wineries that are trying to differentiate themselves from the big producers and have something that they can offer at prices that make sense to their operations economically, rather than trying to compete with the big guys on at price point with Cab, Merlot, and Chardonnay. So this is Zinfandel, and here's what I meant by the big shoulders. So these can be almost 1/4 pound each, and the rest of the cluster about 1/2 pound. So combined they're about 3/4 pound, or can be.
Is that why the Italians like this variety?
Well, it seems like all Italian varieties have big clusters.
So hiking up and down these hills is how you keep your youthful figure?
Oh, that's part of it. Yeah, this is about a 20, well, part of it's greater than 20% south slope, coming up the middle part of it. And it's, being on the south here, it's directly exposed to the prevailing winds from the southwest, and that's part of what makes this a good Zinfandel area. One is it's a long growing season, it's warm and it's windy, it keeps down the rot problems that Zinfandel can be susceptible to.
Well, I've noticed that up and down the gorge, you go down to Gunkel, and probably their Zin is probably the most famous in Washington, but this stretch along the Columbia on the south border of Washington seems to really be Zin country. Well,
yeah, it's great area, and because of those reasons I said, Gunkel, I think, tends to have a little bit heavier soil, but same south slope, same exposure to the prevailing winds. The combination of the slope and the wind gives you a real long growing season in addition to the heat units you need to fully ripen these varieties.